Hello lovely people, welcome to another book chat, the regular roundup of stuff I've read at some point in my past. I kind of have more books than usual to talk about, so I'm going to try and be really concise and go through it.
Doobie 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 doo. Doobie 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 Sophie Vlogs.
I'm going to kick things off with a book that I read on Libby, and that is King Jiyoung, born 1982, by, what is the name? Cho Nam-Joo. This was a really interesting book. It was on my radar because of Monica Kim. I'm going to link a video she did down below where she talked about some of her favourite Korean books. This looks at this woman called Kim Ji-young, and in the first chapter, essentially, like, she starts to impersonate other people, and at first her husband thinks it's a joke, but then it becomes apparent that, like, for those periods of times, she 100% is that person, and then it kind of flashes back through her life and shows you different points of her life. And really what it's doing is it's like shining a spotlight on all of the inherent misogyny and sexism that is present within Korean culture, and is sort of showing you how that all builds up and might make a person then lose it a bit. And it was such an interesting read because it's a very, very short book, and the narrative style was really interesting because it's stuff like her mum is never referred to as like her mother's name, it's like the mother, and like her husband is never referred to by his name, it's the husband. So it kind of feels like, and especially because I think Monica said in her video that Kim Ji-young is one of the most common women's names in South Korea. So it kind of feels like she's like this every woman figure because it's showing you, like, through her eyes and her experiences, you get to see all of the myriad of different ways in which women can be discriminated against, or even just like start off on the back foot compared to men, and this like weird like kind of distance in the narrative that is done by not having too many names, and sort of like at one point this like her classmate, but her classmate is referred to as like the bully and stuff like this. So it's like this weird, like, it's almost like a case study, which kind of makes sense because it's like she is a case study being like observed, like, why has this happened to her, and it's like, here is the evidence. And then as you're reading it, as well as like the descriptions of what's happening, you also get like it's backed up with like stats and figures and stuff that's like here's Kim Ji-young's experience as she became pregnant, and then like here's the actual statistics of like how likely women are to continue in employment once they're pregnant, and what childcare is like, and what entering the workplace after being pregnant is like, and stuff like this. So I found it really illuminating from just a stats point of view and an understanding point of view. I also feel like it's really good to read this like in conversation with If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha, which I read comparatively at my time quite recently. By the time this goes up, it will be a while ago, so I will link the video down below where I talk about If I Had Your Face, but that is also using 4 different women's perspectives to sort of give you an idea of what existing in Seoul is like for certain kinds of women, and that in conversation with this, I don't know, I feel like they feed into each other really well. They're exploring very similar concepts. If I Had Your Face has a real heavy focus on like beauty standards and stuff like that, which is also covered in this, but this also looks at sort of a slightly wider, because it follows the girls in, and I use the word girls because they're all quite young in If I Had Your Face, apart from one narrative, which is a slightly older woman. Whereas in this one, you get a bit more of like a breadth, so like covering like childhood as well and stuff like that. So this is one of those books where I was read it, and it's very short, but I really feel like it packed a punch, and it really gave me a lot to think about. Another book that I kind of feel like fed in quite well with that in some ways is I also read The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. I read this for my work's book club. We take it in turns to pick books. This was my choice because I've been wanting to read this book like for ages, and I was like, this is my opportunity. It feels like a good work book club book because there's a lot to talk about. We haven't had our meeting yet, but I feel like we're going to have so much to talk about. This is absolutely gorgeous. So this follows 2 twins, Stella and Desiree, and essentially they grew up in this really small town called Mallard. The people in Mallard are black, but they very much value like light skin, and over time they have all become very light skinned. Stella and Desiree run away to New Orleans. One of them ends up living her life as a black woman, but one of them ends up passing for white and sort of recreates a new life for herself. this is almost like a series of vignettes in some ways, because it covers a broad span of time and it sort of goes back and forward in time, so you get a lot of different characters' perspectives throughout this. So you don't just get Desiree and Stella, you get like their daughters and that sort of thing. So you sort of jump around a lot, and then it's one of those ones where sort of a bit like Girl, Woman, Other, where it's like, here are vignettes, we're with this person now, and then like towards a certain point things sort of come together somewhat. I think my favourite thing about this was just the writing was just absolutely gorgeous. Like, as I was reading this, I was just so immersed in her way of telling this story, and just like the it was so basic to be like, it just read really nicely, and I found it immensely readable whilst also being just like really beautifully put together. And I think that's sort of backed up by the fact that, like, because you're getting these like vignettes at times, like I feel like I understand these characters to some extent, but also like I'm given very much like snapshots of them. It's not like I'm following one of them for the whole book and I get to know that one character really well. I get to see characters through different characters' eyes as well as their own eyes, so I get to see the different ways that one person and their actions can be perceived. And I found that really interesting. Another thing that was very interesting were ideas of vanishing. As you might tell from the title, vanishing is a theme, and it was just very intriguing reading this to see the different ways that different characters' vanishing happens to them, or they make vanishing happen, if you will. Slightly linked to that is also the concept of passing, which does not just happen in regards to Stella's plotline, but there are other characters as well to whom like passing is also something that they're navigating, and both like the pros and cons of that sort of thing, the ways in which it can improve your life in some ways, but then also like the internal pressures and stuff that come from that. I think those two sort of themes, vanishing and passing, kind of play into each other to some extent. I don't know, those were just two things that I found extremely interesting. Also the concept of doubling, because they are twins and then they both have daughters. There is also this idea of doubling, but equally many characters within this sort of lead double lives. Essentially, I feel like we've got so much to talk about in my book club. Like, I could talk for ages about all of these themes. I'm sure there are so many more things in here that I've not even mentioned. This has been one of those weird years where I keep reading all these books that have like won all these awards, and then I'm suddenly surprised when I actually love them, and it's like, yes, because they're objectively good texts. After that are two books that I did not enjoy as much. I did a reread of The Ruby and the Smoke by Philip Pullman, and then The Tin Princess by Philip Pullman. These are from the Sally Lockhart series, which was one of my favourite series when I was a kid. I really loved this. This is the first book, and this is the fourth book. I've been doing like a bit of a reorganising of my shelves. Essentially, I've been sort of getting rid of books by authors that I just don't feel like are my taste anymore. You know, taste change. Like a lot of these books that are on my shelves I've had for over 10 years, and my reading taste is different. So I've earmarked a bunch to do rereads of, to sort of just reassess, like, is this still a book I connect to? This is not still a book I connect to. I had a number of issues with this. Essentially, this is Philip Pullman riffing off of sort of like Victorian Penny Dreadful style novels. My main problems come down to, one, characterization. I just didn't think characterization was as strong as I remember it being. Maybe that's because the second and third book in this really went further places with them, but I didn't fancy reading them after this. The plotting, I think, was my main problem, because I just felt like the plotting, I got a bit bored at times. It lagged a bit. The sort of conclusion of this kind of happens off screen, and then you're told about it, and I was like, I'm sorry. Do I not get to be present for this? Also, there were just a number of like racial stereotypings which, whilst I understand, are present within the original genre that he is drawing upon. I don't feel like they needed to be included in this book that was written in the 2000s. For example, calling people Chinamen and all of this stuff to do with opium. I don't know. I just felt like there was some racial stereotyping that could have been handled in a slightly more complex way. Essentially, I realised I didn't say what this is about. This is about Sally Lockhart, who's like an orphan, and essentially there's some mystery to do with the death of her father, and she's like trying to figure out what happened. It wasn't like I gave it a 2 stars because, to be honest with you, I remembered the characters and the plotting being much better than they were. I decided to read the 4th book, The Tin Princess, because when I was a kid, this one was my favourite. This was interesting, and I liked it more than I liked this one, but I still didn't really like it. So this follows Jim, who is like a side character in the Sally Lockhart books, and Sally Lockhart isn't really present in this. And someone who is in this book who disappeared pops up, and she's like just married this guy who is like king of this tiny little country that's sort of like within the like sort of Austro-Germanic sort of area of the world. And essentially like there's a plot, someone's trying to like bump off the royal family. Jim ends up being Adelaide's bodyguard. Another character in this, Becky, who is the perspective that you begin this narrative with. She is a citizen of this place, so she can speak the language, and she ends up being Adelaide's translator. One of my main issues with this is I really hated the way that Adelaide and Becky were like characterized. So like Adelaide is like the ultimate #1 woman, she's great. Becky is like constantly put down, and I was just like, Becky's doing a great job of being like a translator and all this stuff. And I don't know, I just felt like there was sort of like, this woman is great, and then Becky was just sort of like shat on a bit by the narrative, to be honest with you, and I didn't like it. I also just found the plotting of this was not to my taste, so this one did not like actively annoy me like this one did. It's just, as I was reading it, it really like pulled the curtain, the wool from my eyes. I don't know what metaphor I'm going with here, but suffice to say, this is just one of those occasions where you read a childhood favourite and you realise that it's not for you anymore, and that's absolutely fine. I do understand why I liked them as a child, playing around with genre, stuff like this. It's just, I'm now an adult reader and my tastes have changed, so, you know, it's not the end of the world, it's just, I'll probably sell them. The final book is one that I don't have a huge amount to say, so I thought I'd just slip it in the end. This is Standing in Another Man's Grave by Ian Rankin. This is one of the Inspector Rebus books. I have never read an Inspector Rebus book before, so I'm aware this is like the 18th in the series. My dad lent this to me. He's lent me a couple of them that follow on from this point, because the original Inspector Rebus books ended when he retired. This is the first book where he's coming back out of retirement. So he was like, this is a great point to start reading from. He very kindly just lent me a whole bunch of books. It's very nice of him. I did think that this worked as a good start point from my perspective, coming in with very little knowledge. This is very much like the stereotypical, like, he is like kind of, not like washed up per se, but like back in his heyday he was the golden boy. He drank hard, he like, you know, probably one of the ones who'd like be like beating up the criminals and stuff like this, whereas now he's like an older man. The system has changed, and many people view him as like a relic of the past. But he has a hunch. This woman goes missing on this particular stretch of road, and Rebus is working in cold cases, and essentially this woman comes to him and is like, I think this is what happened to my daughter many years ago, and then Rebus begins to investigate like these multiple cold cases, could they be related to this current case, and that sort of thing. I think one thing I struggled with this is that like there's a character in this called Fox, and he's from like the complaints department where they like investigate police officers who might be doing things in a dodgy manner. Number one, he's not very likeable. I know that there's a series of books that follow him specifically. This has not made me want to read those. But then also, because like he's investigating Rebus because he thinks Rebus is corrupt, but you get this from Rebus's point of view, so you know that he's not actively corrupt. But equally, Fox does have some points about the way that Rebus is running the operation. For example, maybe you shouldn't be passing information onto the criminals. So, like, for example, like, Rebus has connections that are, like, criminals, because it used to be a thing that you would go out on the street and you would talk to people and you would find out what's happening. But, like, nowadays, if you tell an active criminal that has a spoon in the jar, that's not a metaphor, like a interest in the case. If you tell them information and then the rest of the police force find out that this dude now knows all this information, they are going to be like, why did you tell the criminal this information, you know? So it was like, I don't like Fox, but equally he does have some valid points about how this investigation is being run. I think mainly my problem is that I'm not the biggest police procedural person. I like mysteries that are usually like an independent detective because they have a faster pace, whereas police procedurals, because you have to go by the book and you have to do everything like following the rules, it just takes forever. So I have a perfectly fun time reading this. I'm probably going to give the next one a go, and then how I find the second book will influence whether I read all of the ones that he's lent me, or whether I just pass them back and be like, thank you very much for this kind book lending, you know? That's everything. There's a reason I normally only talk about like 3 or 4 books at a time, because this goes on for a bit. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these. I would love to just have a little chat in the comments down below if you fancy it. But otherwise, I hope you're having a super duper lovely day, and I'll see you next time for something different.